Now we've got this qualifying dependent relative. Here we go. Let's see it. And there's going to be a lot of similarities, but definitely some differences. Now, this person must be a close relative, such as a grandparent, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, nephew, niece. Cousins, foster parents, and unrelated dependents do not qualify. If the individual is not a relative, he or she must live with the taxpayer for the whole year. So that person, if they're not a relative, they have to be there for all 12 months. Residents, this person must live with the taxpayer for the entire year, except in the case of a father or mother. Why is that? Well, classic example, you've got parents in a nursing home. Makes sense, right? A lot of people have their parents in a nursing home, and they're still taking care of them, so you want to get the tax benefit. Support, the taxpayer must provide more than half the cost of living for the dependent relative. Still, you got to pay 60% of your mother or father's expenses, even if they're in a nursing home. For gross income, the dependent relative's gross income for the year must be less than the exemption amount for that year, and we've got this amount included in our resources. That does change year to year. For citizenship, the dependent relative must be a U.S. citizen, U.S. national, or resident of the U.S., Canada, or Mexico. Same deal as what we saw before. For the joint return, same situation. Not going to go over that again, kind of same thing there. But for the multiple support agreement, now why is this a thing? What's going on here? If you've got multiple children that are supporting a parent in a nursing home, well, who claims the person? Okay, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked. If two or more taxpayers, so let's say you got 2 or 3 siblings that are supporting their elderly mother in a nursing home, they contribute more than 50% support for a dependent relative, but no one of these people individually contributes more than 50%, they must decide who can claim the independent relative. So let's say you got 2 children, and they each are providing 25%, so 25 and 25 is 50. This person qualifies as dependent, but who is going to claim this person? Well, the person claiming the dependent must have contributed at least 10%. So if you've got a child that's contributing 60% and another one that's contributing 2%, the one with 2% can't claim that elderly mother as a dependent. And all other contributors must agree to this arrangement by filing this form 2120. You don't really need to memorize the form, but basically just know you got 3 children, 2 children, whatever it is, and you all need to legally agree who is going to be the one to claim this parent as a dependent. Lastly, if the taxpayer is a qualifying widower with a dependent child, they can claim the child as a dependent without meeting the residence requirement. We got an example here. Your 70-year-old mother who does not live with you but relies on your financial support, or your unemployed brother who lives with you and depends on your assistance. These are all individuals who could qualify. Obviously, we'll talk about each specific rule as we have a nice little checkbox. Diving through more examples here for our qualifying relative. Well, first, we've got relationship. The dependent must be a close relative, such as grandparent, sibling, aunt, uncle, nephew, niece, or in-laws. We can have non-relatives as well. We'll see examples such as those. But what's our example? Jane has been providing financial support to her grandmother who lives with her. In this case, Jane's grandmother is a qualifying relative under the relationship criteria. Next, for residents, the dependent must live with the taxpayer for the entire year, except in the case of a father or mother, because they can be in a nursing home. It doesn't have to be, but they could be living with a sibling as well. They don't have to be living with you. It doesn't have to be a nursing home. What's an example here? Brian's aunt moved in with him in January and stayed for the entire year. She meets the residence criteria to be considered a qualifying relative. For support, the taxpayer must provide more than half the cost of living for the dependent relative. This includes expenses like food, clothing, housing, medical and dental care, and education. Quite similar to the child one as well. The example here is that Susan's nephew lives with her and she pays for 60% of his living expenses. In this case, Susan meets the support criteria to claim her nephew as a qualifying relative. Lastly here, gross income. The dependent relative's gross income for the year must be less than the exemption amount for that year. Let's use an example here. This is not the amount. The amount will be listed below in the resources. $4,300 for year 1. So if Amy's brother has a part-time job and earns $4,000 in the tax year, this amount is less than our annual amount, and this person will meet the gross income criteria. More examples. We've got citizenship. The dependent relative must be a U.S. citizen, U.S. national, or resident of the U.S., Canada, or Mexico. I hope you don't mind the repetition here, just going over these one after another. It's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to memorize these, so might as well just go through them together, one after another, right? I'm going crazy. You're going crazy. Who's not going crazy? Well, there's the example here. Jack's uncle is a resident of Canada, lived with him for the entire year. This person would meet the citizenship criteria. Next, for the joint return, this is someone we've seen a few times over. We're not going to go over this again. Basically, if you're married and you only file the joint return, solely to claim the refund for withheld taxes, nothing too wild there. Really just a line you'd have to recognize. For multiple support agreements, we've got 2 or more taxpayers contributing more than 50% of support for a dependent relative. but no one individually contributes more than 50%, they can decide who claims their relative. The example here, Laura and her two siblings each contribute to their elderly father's support, but none of them individually provide more than 50% of his support. They can decide which sibling will claim him as a dependent, and then the chosen sibling must file that form to document the arrangement. We've also got the qualifying widower. If the taxpayer is a qualifying widower with a dependent child, they can claim the child as a dependent without meeting the residence requirement. After her spouse's death, Sarah is considered a qualifying widow with a dependent child. She can then claim her child as a dependent, even if the child does not meet the residence requirement. All right, looking good. Keeping those spirits high, those energy levels as best we can. Let's keep powering along. Let's talk more about college students. We talked about college students, mentioned them as a factor here, but let's see another example. Again, that's the whole point. We're giving you as many examples as possible, so you see all of these possibilities, the way they can ask it on the exam. You're not going to see something you're not familiar with, but be able to think outside the box as well. A college student can still qualify as a dependent even if they do not live at home, as long as they meet certain requirements. To qualify as a dependent, the college student must fulfill the criteria for either qualifying child or qualifying relative. Keep in mind that you can be a child and still be a qualifying relative. You don't have to be a qualifying child if you are a child. In most cases, a college student is considered a qualifying child. Here are the requirements. Well, these are all basically the same. There's nothing different. There's nothing different at all. But here is the example. Your 20-year-old daughter is a full-time college student who lives on campus during the school year. Again, remember, it is 19. This person's above the age of 19, but they are a full-time college student. She returns home during breaks and vacations. You provide more than half of her support, and she does not file a joint tax return. In this case, your daughter is considered a qualifying child, and you can claim her as a dependent even though she's living away from home while attending college. There we go. Some more examples. We've got qualifying dependents. We've got Samantha's elderly father. Now, in this case, it wouldn't change anything if the elderly father lived by himself in his own house or his own apartment or condo. But in this case, it's an assisted living facility. Although he receives Social Security benefits, the amount is not sufficient to cover his living expenses. Yeah, talked about that in other lessons. Hopefully, maybe we all pray that one day we have enough Social Security benefits to cover our expenses, but can't bank on that. Samantha pays for 60% of her father's living expenses, including the costs of assisted living, medical, and other necessities. Really, the only thing you'd have to look for here is to make sure that it's not anything. It's not like, oh, you're paying for his beer and TV, subscriptions. In this case, Samantha's father qualifies as a dependent because she provides more than half of the cost of living, even though he doesn't live with her. There we go. Everyone, make sure you take care of your parents. God willing, they're still with you. Example 2, parent does not qualify as a dependent. David's mother lives in her own home. Okay, we saw. Well, doesn't have to be assisted living. It could be their own home. She receives a pension and Social Security benefits that cover 80% of her living expenses. Already, I'm saying ding, ding, ding. Well, that's 80%. That is more than half, right? That pension and the Social Security benefits cover 80%. It's not David covering them. David contributes the remaining 20%. Great, David, but you can't use your mother as a qualifying dependent here. Sorry. It's great that David is helping out his mother with the remaining 20% for groceries, utility bills, and home repairs. Thank you, David. You're a great son. But in this case, you cannot use the mother as a qualifying dependent because David does not provide more than half of her cost of living. I'm going to leave this up for anyone who wants to take a read. This is something we have covered already. It's multiple support agreements. If you've got 2 or more taxpayers jointly providing more than 50% support for one individual, this is something we've gone over. The example is nothing new, but just providing it to you here in case you want to read some more. And I'm going to be doing that again for another slide. Here we go. Children of divorced parents. Again, this is something we've covered already, but I heard from many users, y'all love the examples. I love examples too, and I get it. So just the more examples I can give you, the better. Feel free to read through here. Hey there. Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material. We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.